I was born in Kentucky, so I say y'all every so often. Sorry about that. I'm not from New Jersey, or however you say it. I just can't do that. I don't know. I have enjoyed, so this is I think it's my second time preaching here, and I've been here a couple of other times back when he who shall not be named, apparently. I can say Baltimore, but I can't say my own name in this. So I'm just, I love this place. I love you guys. I always love hanging out here in Tom's River. It's always fun. And so I'm just honored that I could be invited back and spend some time just hanging out with you guys. I do just want you to know, I'm on staff with Converge Mid-Atlantic, which you guys are connected with. And the staff there, we have been praying for you guys. We've been praying for the search that's happening and all the things that are going on around that. So you have definitely been in our prayers, and we are here to support you, to care for you, to do whatever we can to help you in this process. And it sounds like you're making some good progress, and I can't wait to see where that goes and how we get to continue to partner with you. But on behalf of Converge, I do in some weird official way bring you greetings. I go to some churches and I have to actually say that, and I have to, because the pastor has been there for 200 years or something, and they're into this really formal stuff. But yeah, I'm just so glad that I get to be here with you guys for a while, and Caleb, doing a great job, dude. I mean, you got thrown into this at the last minute, and I just want you to know, yes, you're doing a great job, and it is noticed, and so that is great. So I flew in yesterday, and thank you, Lord, it was a very uneventful flight. That's always nice. But I was sitting in the airport, and I heard someone say to someone else, Godspeed. And that got me thinking. I mean, you've heard people say that, and whatever, but I started thinking, exactly how fast does God go? Is it really fast? Is it, if I went at God's speed, wouldn't I explode or something? I don't know how that works, but I'm just trying to figure out what in the world. So, of course, I hopped on my little Google machine and said, let's see where this came from, and it ends up, it came from the 14th century. It was an expression used, and we know it literally, it just means, hey, I wish you, a prosperous journey, right? Or maybe the wind be behind your back and all that, fancy whatever stuff. And that's fine, but it really got me thinking, what is really Godspeed? What would that really be like? And I started thinking, well, the one person who represented God to us is Jesus. Scripture makes it very clear that if you want to see what God is like, look at Jesus. And so I started thinking, Jesus lived a long time ago. They didn't have airplanes. They didn't have cars. They didn't have any of that. So Jesus walked. And the average person walks at about 3 miles per hour. So my guess is actually that God's speed in its most literal form would be 3 miles per hour, because that's how fast Jesus walked. And I wondered what it would be like if we started thinking of our lives as moving at God's speed. I want to look at a passage today in Luke chapter 8, and in this passage, Jesus he models this idea of what it looks like to move through our life at God's speed. In Luke chapter 8, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but let me just summarize, kind of what's going on. Basically, that there's these women that bless Jesus, and there's, and he tells a parable, and it's just, different random stuff, but parable of a sower. And you guys, sowing the seed and all that stuff. And then his family wants to see him, but Jesus kind of disses them. He's like, who is my family but those who obey God, etc. And it's like, well, your mom gave birth to you, so you might want to, chill that a little. But he, he just does this, and then he goes across the Sea of Galilee, and there's a storm, and he calms it, and so that's really cool. And he lands on the other side, and there's this demon-possessed dude that lives in the cemetery that runs out and is kind of yelling and all this stuff, and Jesus casts out the demon, and the disciples, of course, are blown away. The people come rushing out, and they actually say, hey, you know what? If you can cast a demon out like that, and you probably should go back to the other side. We're not real comfortable with you here. You're way too powerful. So he goes back to the other side, and when he lands on the other side, there are people waiting for him. And that's where I want to pick up, because he gets back, and it says on the other side, and I'm just going to read this. It's not on the slides or anything. I just want you to listen. Think of this as, Jesus. This is the narrative of what's happening to Jesus. It says on the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. Then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came, and he fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. His only daughter, who was almost 12 years old, was dying. As Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. Coming up behind Jesus, she touched the fringe of his robe. Immediately, the bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. Everyone denied it. And Peter said, Master, the whole crowd is pressing up against you. But Jesus said, someone deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out from me. When the woman realized that she could not stay hidden, she began to tremble and fell to her knees in front of him. The whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him and that she had been immediately healed. Daughter, he said to her, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. While he was still speaking to her, a messenger arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, and he told him, your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher. But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Just have faith and she will be healed. He goes on, when Jesus arrived at the house, he wouldn't let anybody else go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and the mother of the girl. The house was filled with people weeping and wailing, but he said, stop the weeping. She isn't dead. She's only asleep. But the crowd laughed at him because they knew that she had actually died. Then Jesus took her by the hand, and he said in a loud voice, my child, get up. And at that moment, her life returned. And she immediately stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were overwhelmed, but Jesus insisted that they not tell anyone what had happened. Moving at God's speed, according to Jesus. What does that look like? I don't know about you, but I haven't spent too much time walking around raising people from the dead. Okay, that's just not a gift apparently that I have. I've done a lot of funerals, and I've never seen the person get up out of the box. Okay, I don't have that gift. I've never actually healed anyone, as far as I know. I'm not a doctor. I didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn Express, so I don't want to try to, pretend to be any of that. And yet, Jesus calls us to follow him and to be like him and to do some of the things that he does. He even said, you will do greater things than me. And so I thought, well, what do I need to do to walk as Jesus did, to walk my life at God's speed? What are some principles that I can see in the way Jesus operated that maybe will help me as I try to walk like that? And maybe they could help you. A couple of things I noticed, and we're just going to look at this. We'll meditate on this for a few minutes, and then you get a beautiful day we can go enjoy. First thing I noticed, though, is in Luke 8, verses 40 and 41. It says, on the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. Then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. Jesus got interrupted, right? I mean, he landed, and the first principle is he was moving with an open agenda. He landed and was basically saying, oh, okay, I'm ready, God. What's going to happen next? I didn't map this out. I don't have this, nice little neat. Do you guys remember the triptychs that you used to get from AAA. Some of you don't realize there are paper maps that you can actually have. But yeah, I remember getting those a few times, and it would, I'm going from here to here, and it'd be this night, it was kind of long, and there, you'd flip it, and you just have chunks of the trip. It was like GPS, but, animated or something, right? And Jesus didn't do that. He did not have it all planned out. He showed up and was like, okay, let's see what's going to happen. And honestly, Jesus didn't really have a true focused agenda until the middle of every single gospel. If you do any studies of the gospels, the very middle of each one is about when it says that Peter made this confession of faith, right? Where Jesus said, who do people say that I am? And Peter says, oh, you are, the Son of God, right? The Messiah. And Jesus says, you're right. Rocky is what I'm going to call you now. And so that's how it's going to go. And then the transfiguration happens. And in Luke especially, it says, from that moment on, he set his face to go to Jerusalem because he knew that's where the cross was. But up until then, he was moving with a very open agenda, ready to do whatever God put in his path. Now, I can tell you, I like to have a plan. I travel a lot for my work with Converge, and I like to know where I'm going. I like to know how to get there. I like to have, somewhat of an agenda, at least so I, use my time well and all that fun stuff. But Jesus didn't seem to be as obsessed about that as I am. You see, he left a lot of room for interruptions. I mean, think about it. Most of his most amazing ministry, miracles, etc., were done because of an interruption. You guys like being interrupted? No, I don't. And yet that seems to be when Jesus did some of his best work. I don't know about you, but we are obsessed with efficiency. Right? I want to use every moment. I want to do it right. I want to get it done. I want to make sure that I get the most out of every single moment. And we all only get 24 hours a day, right? And so we want to make the most of our time. We don't want to waste our time. And our modern sensibilities push us to plan out every detail of every day, of every moment, so that we don't waste anything. And yet Jesus seemed to be a meanderer, a wanderer. He seemed to dilly-dally. That's what my mom used to call it. These are all things that frustrate me. I have he'll be 5 next week, and a 3-year-old. I have 2 grandsons. And trying to walk them up to the park in our neighborhood, it's a 4-minute walk, maybe 5 with their little legs. But when I'm trying to get them there, it's about a 20-minute walk. Because they're not thinking about where they're going, they're thinking about where they are. And they're distracted by there's a rock that I need to jump off of. Because, these two, they're both boys, and they are feral. Like, they are just crazy. And I had 2 girls that I raised, and having these 2 little boys, they are nuts. And so I see, there's an ant to play with. There's a rock. There's something to throw. There's a little rock that I'm going to save for later. Poppy, will you hold this for me, right? Mud puddles. Don't get me started, right? They're just constantly all over the place. And I just wonder if maybe Jesus' disciples, there wasn't a time where they kind of felt like they were taking a walk with a 4-year-old. Think about, so what are some of the things that Jesus said? Consider the birds of the air. How many times has my little grandson gone, ooh, Poppy, look at that bird? Right? So consider the lilies of the field. You ever looked for a 4-leaf clover with a 3-year-old? Jesus seemed to slow down enough to be able to see what was going on and to say, God, I see you present in everything. Can you imagine Matthew? He was a tax collector. This was an accountant. This is a guy who was very task-oriented. Can you imagine how frustrated he got trying to walk around with Jesus? And yet Jesus said, no, we're going to meander. Now, I will say there are some guiding principles that we see operating within Jesus as he's walking right, at this pace as he is, really trying to move with an open agenda. But he is always, first of all, he's always moving towards people in need. I mean, think about that for just a moment. He is always moving. Didn't always mean it was a physical need. Right? This is why he had dinners with the Pharisees. Well, they were rich. They didn't need anything, but their souls were bereft of life. And he saw that need. He was always moving towards people that had needs. This is what we would call now a cruciform life, a life that is shaped by the cross. Jesus was always moving toward the cross. He was always moving towards sacrificing himself for us. And if we are going to shape our life like Jesus, it's going to have to be one that is shaped like sacrifice for those around us. That's what it means to move through your life with an open agenda, looking for needs. Now, I can tell you right now, I've spent enough time with Wellspring, and I've spent enough time with Graham and with Jason, and then now with Caleb as I get to know him, that this church, you move towards people in need. I got to participate last year in one of your big things. We were handing out stuff, and it was so much fun. And I mean, I still remember all of that because it was so cool to see an entire church say, we will move towards people in need because that's what Jesus would do. And we want to show Jesus to this community. Just keep doing that. Keep moving towards those in need. Now, along with this, as he moved towards people in need, but he also moved away from power and control over others. Right? He didn't go to those in need so that he could then show them how amazing he was and then control them by giving them stuff and holding it over them. Right? He wasn't about control. He wasn't about trying to have power. He was about serving simply because he loved people. And so he would move toward them, and then he would say, you know what, the first will be last, and the last will be first. Now, his agenda, it was open, but he did have some principles guiding him where he'd go. Moving towards those with need, not moving towards power and control. But the next thing that I see Jesus doing is in verse 45 of Luke 8, he stops in the middle of everything and he says, who touched me? Everyone denied it. And Peter said, Master, the whole crowd is pressing up against you. There's no way you could know who exactly, because everybody did. But here's the thing, Jesus, not only does he move with an open agenda, he moves slow enough to stop. Now, it's hard to stop when you're moving at breakneck speed, right? Most of Jesus' life was about interruptions. He would stop. He never seemed to be in a hurry. You know, if you read through the Gospels and you just read where, he never seems like he's in a rush. That convicts me, okay? I'm just going to tell you that right now because I am always in a rush. To me, it's not about the journey. It's about getting there, wherever there is. And I'm always moving forward, and I want to get there as quickly as possible. I mean, it's almost a race. When I punch in Google Maps and I see what the estimated time of arrival is, that's a challenge. Like, you want to bet? But Jesus, he didn't move like that. Right? He moved slow enough so that he could stop when he needed to. It's interesting, this same incident, the book of Mark talks about it, and he shares the same incident. And in the Greek, his version of this is a one long run-on sentence when he comes to describing the woman. It's in the ESV, it reads this way. It says, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. The actual sentence, for those of you who maybe are English teachers or you really loved English because you're weird like me, and the actual sentence, right, the subject and the predicate is a woman touched his garment. Everything else in that phrase is basically a participial phrase. It's just a description of the action, of what was going on, of the woman. It would kind of read like this. It would read, a woman having a discharge of blood, having suffered under the doctors, having spent all she had, but not getting any better, having heard about Jesus, she touched his garment. Even though Jesus was walking with a very powerful man, a man of power, a man of prestige, a man of influence, he was aware when a desperate woman touched the corner of his garment. I mean, the narrative builds the tension. So it's almost as if time stood still. Everything else in the picture fades except for Jesus and this woman. I don't know about you, but I'm almost always thinking about the next task, the next appointment, the next meeting. There's something about following Jesus' example of being fully present in this moment with this person, addressing this need. Jesus was able to stop, but he wouldn't have been if he had just been hurrying on to get to Jairus' daughter. They were fighting through the crowds. Now, real quick, I want to take a pause and I want to ask the question, why did she touch the hem of his garment? Why is that such a big deal? And let me just give you a quick little caveat here so you know why that mattered. I mean, in that time, right, it was not unusual to have a celebrity celebrating culture, right? That they would celebrate the celebrities. The Caesar would come back from war and everybody would want to reach out and just touch it. And I know today we don't really have any celebrities. We don't fall for all that stuff, right? I mean, I was at a concert Friday night in Columbus. It was this little band called 21 Pilots, and they it's funny because I knew them before they were big, and so now to see them, they sold out Nationwide Arena, which seats 20,000, 3 nights, and watching them work through the crowd and everyone trying to reach out and touch them, and I couldn't help but think about Jesus moving through and all these people, and that was common even 2,000 years ago. But Jesus, it's interesting because back then they would think, and I think we still think this, we just don't call it this. Back then, the Caesar, the conquering general, whatever would come through, and they wanted to touch him because they felt like that person was dripping with the presence of the gods. And if they could just get a little bit, it might help them get a little further in life. And I wonder if that's not what we do sometimes when we want to be there to shake someone's hand, to touch the person, to reach out when that celebrity is moving through the crowd to get to another place, whatever it is. We think that. And there's a little bit of that with this woman. I think that was a common feel, but there's really even a deeper thing going on because she touched the hem of his garment. She meant to. That's what she was reaching for. She was a Jew. She was familiar with the Jewish scriptures. She knew in Numbers chapter 15 that God commands those who follow him to wear tassels on the hem of their garments. And they were to be reminders of God's presence. And these tassels, these corners of the garments were called kanap. And it was a reminder for them to obey God, to stay in communion and fellowship and obedience to God. Well, once a king was established, right? Because you had the law, but then there was, 100+ years before there's actually a king. But then when a king was established, that tassel, that symbol on the hem of their robe became this representative thing, right? It would symbolize, if you wore this, you are the king, you are in charge, you are closer to God, you are called by God. You are to bring God's presence to the people, to represent God to them. And those tassels became this symbol of God's presence on someone. I mean, think about it. What did David do when he caught Saul in a cave? Do you remember? I mean, Saul went in to relieve himself. More potty humor, Caleb, if you need it. Right? And David cuts off the edge of his garment. And even that, he feels convicted that he did it. He confesses it because it was so rich with symbolism. But then you've got in Malachi chapter 4, verse 2 says, But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings, and you will go free, leaping with joy like calves let out for pasture. It says, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. The word wings there in Hebrew, kanap. It's the same word. And it's talking about how Jesus, the Messiah, would come and bring healing, and you could feel it just in even the tassels on his garment. The woman was expressing her faith that Jesus was the Messiah when she reached for the hem of his garment to find healing. This is why Jesus says, your faith has made you whole. Your faith in what? Her faith that if she could just touch the hem of his garment, there was healing in that because he was the one that God had sent. Okay, unpause. That's just a side note. You can meditate on that later and figure out what that means. But let me ask you, if you pulled your calendar out right now, do you have the ability to stop ever? I looked at mine the other day and I was like, I can't preach this message with my calendar looking like the way it does. It makes me a hypocrite. I've always found, the main reason I get going so fast is I'm trying to justify my existence. I want God to see how busy I am, that maybe he'll love me more. You don't need to do that. The more you do does not make him love you anymore. You are already as loved as you possibly can be. And I know there are seasons in your life where things do get busy, right? I mean, I had little kids at home. I remember that was just stupid crazy. That's just the way life is sometimes. There are seasons. The problem is, at least in my life, I found that those seasons weren't seasons. They were just the norm. Because I always found reasons to be more and more busy. So don't let a season become a lifestyle. Be willing to, step in and say, I got to be able to stop when the Spirit leads. All right, last one, real quick. In the end of that, it says, while he was still speaking to her, a messenger arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. He told him, your daughter has died. There's no use troubling the teacher now. But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Just have faith and she will be healed. Jesus, he moved with an open agenda. He moved with, and he moved slow enough to stop. But last of all, he was moving to the melody of God's love. He sensed in Jairus that Jairus was going to suffer in some ways that God was like, no, it's not time for that. I want to do something here that's going to change everything. And he sensed God's Spirit moving because he was God, right? But he was open and aware, and he saw that right then God was saying, we're not done. The story is not over. There's still another chapter in this little section. It wasn't about the woman completely. Yeah, that was part of it. But we're still going to heal this girl. I told you at the beginning I was going to go heal her. Just because she died, that doesn't change what I told you I was going to do. And so Jesus goes with Jairus. because he can sense the melody of God at work, and it needed to continue. He couldn't just stop it. Kind of like Caleb stops his videos right in the middle of a breath. Right? He'd say, no. We're going to finish this because the song of God is playing life. Now, to hear the melody of God is not an easy thing, especially when we are constantly bombarded with everything that is bombarding us all over the place, right? Between the constant news that's being thrown at us, the information being thrown at us, the constant, tension and stress of just driving in New Jersey. Holy cow, how do you do that? We make left turns in Ohio. I'm just saying, okay? Well, we're close to NASCAR, I guess. We get so stressed out, and we just can't hear God's melody playing in our life, because he doesn't blare everything out with his melody. He wants you to set some of that aside so you can hear it, and you can follow it, and you can move in the rhythm of God's melody. Recently, I was meeting with a spiritual director, and he was asking me questions about, my walk with Christ, and like a spiritual director is supposed to do, right? Okay. And I realized at that point, the best metaphor that I could come up with was that when I thought about my life with Christ, I was still dancing, but I really couldn't hear the music. I was doing the moves that the Christian's supposed to do, right? I was going to do the read my Bible, right? And spend my time in prayer and read this and serve here. And I had the little dance moves going, which you don't want to ever see me dance. Just trust me on that one. But I knew the moves and I was doing them, but I couldn't hear the music. And I don't know about you, but if you're dancing without music, you're just kind of twitching. And it looks funny, and it doesn't have any meaning, and it's really odd. But when you're listening to the music, the dance has meaning because you're moving with the music. And trust me, the music hadn't stopped. I just stopped listening. I was moving as though I was a superhero. I was moving at superhero speed. I was moving at super Jason speed. That's what I looked like. I thought I was Shazam, just driving forward. But I needed to slow down so I could hear the music. Can you hear the music today? Can you hear God moving in your spirit? Can you sense the presence of the Holy Spirit in your life? Can you sense where he is leading you? Because you're not supposed to be moving so fast that you can't stop. You're not supposed to be moving so fast that you can't see where God is leading, that you can't feel the person tug at the hem of your garment. This might take a reorientation of your entire life. Or it might just take a couple of tweaks. But I'm just curious, where are you today? When you think about moving at God's speed through your life. Because at the end of your life, God's not going to ask, how far did you go? How quickly did you get there? How much did you accomplish? How much stuff did you gather? How much money did you make? You know what he's going to ask you? He's going to ask you, did you sense where I was leading you? What I was calling you to do, who I was calling you to serve. That's moving at God's speed. And if you can't hear the music right now, let's take a minute and get quiet enough to hear it. And let's ask God to lead us where we're going. Would you pray with me?